watch says that it's 1 o'clock, and I'm excited to already have so many folks join us. So, Nikki, what do you think? Should we dive in?
Let's get
Awesome.
buzzing.
All right, I am going to drop all of my beautiful galleries of people with us down and just say welcome to everybody. Happy Team Member Appreciation Week. We are so honored to get to do this with you because what you do every single day makes all of our work at the foundations possible. So it's a real joy to get to be with you. Um, so my name is Nona Evans. I haven't met lots of you. Thank you to those of you who I've worked with in the past. I see lots of old friends. Um, Among other things, I'm a beekeeper, which is why we're here today to talk about honey. Usually we do these to talk about bees. So if I get off track, Nikki's going to give me a swift kick under the table. This is the first time that we've offered this virtual event that is all about honey. So we would really appreciate any feedback we have. We'll have lots of time today for questions. Nikki's going to help me facilitate those out of the chat. So she leads emerging media for Whole Kids and Whole Cities. So if you do have questions, drop them into the chat and she'll stop us or throw them in when we have time for questions. And you are always welcome to reach out to me directly, hence the digits on the screen. So we'll dive in. Today we're going to explore the amazingly sweet world of honey. We're going to learn about what honey is, how it's made and harvested, a little bit about seasonal honey because honey is seasonal, and then how to best enjoy the flavor and the health benefits that honey has to offer. So that is what we're going to do today. In my professional job, I'm the executive director for Whole Kids Foundation and Whole Cities Foundation. Whole Kids for the past 10 years has been dedicated to improving the way we feed our kids and improving children's nutrition. So just as a quick commercial message to let you know why we're here with you, through our mission, we've been able to influence over 10 million kids who now have better access to fresh fruits and vegetables at school. And in addition to funding salad bar equipment and gardens for schools, we also offer free honeybee education for all schools and also grants to support beehives at schools, because we know that learning about the importance of pollinators is essential to growing the next generation of responsible eaters and consumers. So you might not know it, but honeybees are the world's most important species because they're the most productive pollinator. So honeybees are responsible for pollinating 80% of our food crops, and even more if you think about cosmetics and clothing. So cotton is pollinated by honeybees. So today's event is all about honey. You're going to learn a little bit about the inner workings of a hive, but we do have another event that focuses on that next Monday. So you can find that in the global events on interview, and Nikki's going to drop that in the chat so you have the link. There are tons and tons and tons of reasons to keep bees, and honey is just one of them. So let's dive in. So the boxes that you see on your screen are hives. And this is one of the 3 bee yards that I keep with my husband in Southeast Texas. We've been keeping bees for the past 4 years, and we have about 30 hives. So in nature, honeybees really prefer to live in the hollowed out trunk of a tree. So as beekeepers, we work really hard to provide hives that are as close to nature as possible. So these are Langstroth hives. That's what the boxes are called. And they were designed to create that vertical space so that the colony can continually grow. So what is honey? Honey is made from nectar that honeybees gather from flowers. So honeybees are the only insect that makes something that we eat. So I always like to ask people to think of pollen as advertising for the nectar in the flowers. So if you look at these flowers closely, you can see their pollen. On the left, it's the little yellow dots that go around the base of that flower. And 1 in 3 bites of the food that we eat and that we sell at Whole Foods Market requires pollination. On the right, that's a lemon tree. So in the back, you can see a lemon, and that honeybee is headed in to drink the nectar from that flower. And you can see the little yellow pollen bits on the end of the stamen. And she's going to pick up some of that pollen and take it to the next flower. And that's what enables those fruits to grow. So bees go to the flowers to drink their nectar, and that pollen sticks to these little staticky hairs on their legs. And every time they go to a new flower, a little bit of that pollen falls off, and that is pollination. Uh-oh, Nikki, I got a technical message that you've spotlighted video. I think we're okay.
Yeah, I spotlighted your video, so you'd show up on the screen with slides. So keep going, hopefully.
Okay. So once the bees have collected the nectar, they take it back to the hive, and it's processed through the honey stomach. So bees have two stomachs. One is their honey stomach, and it is passed from bee to bee to further process the nectar, which is mostly water. It starts out at about 80% water. And as it's processed through the honey stomachs of several bees and then stored into one of the cells in this honeycomb, which is what you see on the left, it dries out. So when nectar is about 17 or 18% water, that is when it's honey. So when the bees have dried the nectar into honey, and again, that's done by passing it from bee to bee through their honey stomach and by flapping their wings. So they'll fan in their hive to dehydrate that nectar. So once it's perfectly honey, they put a beeswax cap on top of that honeycomb cell. And that's what you see on the right of your screen. That's a honey frame. It's a whole frame full of beeswax. So if you can see your camera, this is a frame. It's just a wooden rectangle that we put into the hives, and the bees build their comb on it and fill it up with honey. So now that you know what honey is, I like to talk about the reason that humans are able to enjoy it. First, it's important to know that honey is the bees' food. They don't make it for us. But honeybees are able to produce 3 to 4 times the amount of honey they need for their hive each year. And the reason that they do that is that in nature, there are predators. So these are not my photos. I did borrow them from a group that I'm in. We live in Texas, and there aren't any bears here, thankfully. But bears are one of the most threatening predators to beehives. It's not just Winnie the Pooh. You can see these are some women beekeepers in a group that I belong to. I don't know if you've ever been in the honey aisle and wondered why honey is so often packaged in those little honey bears. And it's because bears are the ones in nature that are the real threat to honey in a hive. So I think I have one more photo to show you the kind of destructive power that bears can have. So the bees know that there are these kinds of threats out there, so they overproduce. So thankfully, there are a few other predators, just so you know, because we don't have bears in Texas. In our yards, we keep a brick on top of each of our hives because those curious little hands that raccoons have can take those lids right off, and they like to taste the sweet stuff that's inside. Mice can also be a problem. And then there are some other threats like hive beetles and wax moths and mites that we as beekeepers constantly work to prevent. So with managed hives, it's the beekeeper that plays the role of the bear. So we make sure that the hive has enough honey for the health of the colony, and we take off the extra honey so that the colony doesn't become honey bound. Thankfully, I have never had to see that kind of destruction in one of our yards. I don't think I could handle it. So in our bee yard, we use 10 frame boxes. That's what you can see on the left. And again, a frame is just a wooden rectangle that fits into those boxes. And it's where the queen lays her eggs. So one approach to harvesting honey, and there are lots. I always like to say if you have 10 beekeepers in a room and you ask a question, you'll get 12 answers. So what you're hearing today is my approach to beekeeping and my opinion. But one of the ways that we harvest honey is we use what's called a queen excluder, which is what you see on the right. It's a metal grate that allows the worker bees to pass through so they can go up into the box that sits on top of it and build comb and store honey. But the queen won't fit through because she's too big. The queen is the biggest bee in the hive. So the excluder keeps her down in that bottom box where all of the brood is so that she knows where to lay. And that makes it a whole lot easier when it's time to harvest, because as the beekeeper, I know the queen is really safe in that bottom box. I don't have to worry about harming her or doing any damage to the colony. So beekeepers watch their hives really carefully during honey producing seasons to make sure that the colony has enough room. So if a colony fills up one box with honey, and that's called a honey super, then we add another. And generally, we leave the honey on the hive until the flow or the blooming season for flowers and trees is nearly done. So that gives the bees time to dry that nectar out and make sure that the moisture content is just right to be enjoyed as honey. So we tend to pull all of our honey supers from a season on one day. I have to tell you, it is incredibly exciting, and it's some of the most backbreaking, exhausting work I've ever experienced. And I've worked at the grocery store for almost 30 years. So just to put things in perspective, so those wooden frames weigh absolutely nothing when they go into a hive. And once the bees have built their comb and filled them up with honey, this is one frame that weighs almost 11 pounds. So if there are 10 frames in a box and each one can weigh 10 pounds, that means one of those boxes of honey can be 100 pounds. And when you're moving all of those boxes from the hive to the truck, it is a good day. I need to start doing my upper body workout now for harvest this year. So just to put things in perspective a little bit, my husband is a really, really good sport and puts up with me taking all these photos to share. So just for perspective, he's 6'1", and this is an example of a very large productive hive. So you can see two boxes on the bottom that contain brood. Normally there's only one, but this happens to be a really healthy, robust hive. So the queen has laid brood in two boxes. The blue box and the one above it are both honey supers. So we had a really early flow right after that crazy freeze. And this hive filled up that blue box with honey. So we added another one on top. With all of this rain, things have really slowed down. So rain washes the nectar out of flowers, and then it takes a few sunny days for that nectar to rebuild. So this piece of the season right now is really dicey for us, which is why we're glad the hives have some honey on them. The top box is a feeder, and it serves two purposes. So it's a space that allows the hive to vent hot air. So we're in Texas, and we can spend days and days and days over 100 degrees. And bees really like their hive right around 98 degrees. So just like body temperature for us. So that extra space just helps that hot air escape up. And then inside is also a place where we can add some sugar syrup if there isn't enough forage out in nature. So in this photo, you can—
Hey, Nona?
Yeah.
Real quick, since we're on the topic of the brood box, there's a question from Melody. So is it only one queen that supports the two brood boxes?
It is. And there are lots of different ways you can keep bees. So there are indeed situations where you can have a mother-daughter queen, those sorts of things. But the way we keep our hives is one queen per. So yes, one queen can lay up to 2,000 eggs a day. And at this point in the season, one of those hives can have about 60,000 worker bees working at any given time. So they are just overflowing with bees. That's a great question. All right, Nikki, I'm going to keep going. Stop me again if we have others. So in this picture, we have pulled the honey supers off of our hives. And you can see down at the bottom where that blue arrow is that we have a stainless steel sheet tray. And that does a couple of things. It both seals the honey supers and contains the sticky. We'll talk about that later. So one of the things I love is that bees are the world best photo bombers, which is what you can see on that top arrow. It's so hard to take a great photo without some, lady flying right in front of you. So what you need to know is that bees don't give up their goodness easily. every bee in a hive has a job. And on harvest days, the guard bees do their darndest to keep the beekeeping bears from taking their honey. So bees can actually sense CO2 when we exhale, which is how they target the head of their predators. So if a bear goes into their hive, those bees are going to swarm around the head of that bear to try and get it to go away. So the same thing happens when we pull the honey supers off, is we wind up with a swarm of bees telling us this is not cool. None of them are harmed. We work really carefully to take good care of all of our bees. But I can tell you that on harvest day, it can get quite loud. You'd be amazed at how the buzz of those little tiny insects can just become deafening. So once we have the honey supers off of our hives, the fun begins. So what I'll share next is how we get the honey out of the supers. But let's stop. And Nikki, are there other questions?
Yes, looks like we have one more from Anthony. Is the buzz the indicator for harvest day, or how do you know when it's harvest day?
So a couple of ways. That's a really good question. So during this time of year, we go out and observe our hives about once a week. It doesn't mean that we get in there and disrupt what they're doing, but we'll watch the activity outside of the hive. We might take the lid off and just peek to see how much space they have. So one, we watch what the plants are doing. So when everything has stopped blooming, the bees aren't going to be bringing in any more nectar to turn into honey. So that's the first clue. The second is space. So if we're having a bumper year, which we're not this year, so honey is going to be a little bit more expensive this year. But if we're having a bumper year and they filled up several boxes, then we might go ahead and take those boxes off to harvest. But also a good indicator is when the bees have capped most of their frames of honey. So if you remember that slide where the entire frame had that light yellow waxy cap on it, that is the bees telling us this is honey, it's perfect, we've capped it so it is safe and will stay there forever. So there's lots of different indicators, but those are the ones that we look for.
No, we have one more question from Kate. She's asking if that blower in the picture, is that to clear the bees kind of before you leave, or what do you use the blower for?
That is a very good question. So nature has a huge effect on bee behavior. And on cloudy days, bees are opportunistic. So if they don't have to fly 3 miles to go collect nectar, if they can instead just fly to our truck where we've got boxes and boxes of honey, they're going to go ahead and take that honey back to their hive. So this is actually an electric blower that has a really low setting. So we can use it to just blow bees off of a frame or out from away from the truck so that they don't come home with us. I can tell you that inevitably when we bring our honey supers in, we wind up with 2 or 3 bees in the house. It's not a big deal. We pick them up and relocate them. I have a beautiful garden at home, so they have a great place to live. And when bees are displaced like that, they will join another hive. So they'll follow a honeybee and find a new hive home. Good question. All right, we'll keep going. So you know what honey is, you know how it's stored in the hive, you know how we harvest it off of the hive. Let's talk about how do we get it out of these frames so that we can enjoy it. So my husband and I harvest in our kitchen. Now, many communities do have either mobile harvest huts or community spaces where beekeepers can go to do this work. Here in Austin, the Austin Beekeepers Association actually also has harvesting equipment that you can borrow. So there are lots and lots of resources. With 30 hives, it was worth it to us to go ahead and invest in our own equipment because that means we can harvest whenever our hives are ready. So what you can see in this photo is a beautiful, almost as perfect as you can get honey frame. That entire frame is filled with capped honey. So cut comb honey is one of the most prized products. It's also the most expensive. And that's when you take that frame and you simply cut squares to sell. So I happen to have a piece of just empty honeycomb here, so you can see it's incredibly light. I wish you could feel it. And then I have a little square of cut comb that I can show you. And this piece of cut comb weighs almost 2 pounds. So they're about the same size. This weighs nothing, and this is full of honey. So beeswax is edible and it does have some nutritional value. Some people chew it like bubble gum. The reason that cut comb honey is more expensive is because the beekeeper and our bees give up their comb. So when you take home comb honey, you're taking that resource in addition to the honey. And that means the bees next year have to start from scratch. And that'll make a little bit more sense in a couple of slides. So if you're just harvesting a few frames of honey, you can use what's called the crush and strain method. And that is exactly what it sounds like. I used to demonstrate this live, and then I learned that it would be much better for you and for me to film a video because then I wouldn't have sticky hands for the rest of the presentation. So literally you crush the honeycomb and the honey runs through a strainer. So you can see it's my pasta strainer. We have tried all sorts of mashers and tools. And what we found is that hands are absolutely the most efficient and effective. So this is not sophisticated, but here's my mom showing you how to crush honey out of a piece of honeycomb. All right, squish away. So you can see that once you break the cappings, the honey runs right out. And that comb will compress down to a little tiny ball. And it's amazing how much honey comes out of that comb. So this is also a really good place to talk about the amazing properties of honey. So of course, we are always very, very careful to work with exceptionally clean hands. That goes without saying. But honey is full of antibacterial enzymes. Honey has been used for thousands and thousands of years as a wound treatment. So even at home, if I get a scratch on my arm, I'll put a little drop of honey on my Band-Aid, and it's amazing how quick the healing process happens. It's just like magic. And it's that antibacterial strength in honey that means that honey never spoils. They found honey in containers in the tombs of Egypt that was just as good and as solid in its molecular form and taste as honey that was harvested yesterday. So honey also has really strong anti-inflammatory properties. So when you crush and strain a piece of comb like that, you are left with the comb or the beeswax. And we make use of everything that our honeybees give us. So we melt down that wax and you can reuse it. I use some of it to make hand salve. I grow flowers in my garden and I'll make oil infusions and mix them with the beeswax to make just a really healing hand salve. And we also use it to coat the tops of the frames that we put in our hive so the bees have a guide. It shows them where to start their building. So I was just like to talk a little bit about beeswax. So when you have more than a few frames of honey to harvest, we use an extractor. And that's just a big metal stainless steel cylinder with racks that hold the frames and a motor that spins the frames around, and the honey is drawn out by centrifugal force. So we put these frames, well, there's one step ahead of this. I almost got ahead of it. So you have to take the cappings off of those cells before you put them in an extractor. And that's what's happening in these photos. So my favorite tool is just a big offset serrated knife. You can see my son in the middle using it to take the cappings off, and the cappings fall down into a food grade bucket because they still have lots of honey on them. And then we drain off the honey, and that cappings wax is some of the most pure wax, and it's great for cosmetics. So generally when you buy cosmetics that have beeswax, this is where it will have come from. So once the cappings are removed from the frames, you can slide those frames down into the rack of the extractor. And bees are super smart. So they angle the cells up on either side. So each frame has two sides. And they angle the cells up just slightly so that when that nectar is really watery, it doesn't drip out. But what that means for us beekeeping bears is we have to spin both sides of the frames to get all of the honey out. So I think on this, so in this shot, you can see just that slight little angle to those cell walls that holds the nectar in place. And in this shot, you can see a catch bucket that is down below the extractor. It's the white bucket, and it has a strainer on it. It's not fancy. You can get something just like this at the Home Depot. And it has a really fine mesh at the bottom. So we spin the honey out of the frames and then strain it through that fine mesh. That's the only processing that our honey gets. And the only reason we do that is because occasionally there's a bee leg or a wing or some other little extraneous part that if you bought honey, you would not want included. So if you're buying honey for its health benefits, it's always important to ask how the honey was processed. So the process that I just described to you, this is raw honey that has not been pasteurized. And this is also not filtered honey. This is just strained. So if you do apply heat or if you buy pasteurized honey, it's totally fine to eat. It just means that that heat that has been applied can damage some of the enzymes that provide the healing aspects to honey. So here you can see that the honey collects down in the bottom of the extractor, and then it runs out through that strainer. If I could bottle the smell of this moment when you lift the lid on that extractor, it is just so amazing and earthy and sweet. So after we've spun the frames, we're left with the beeswax on the frame. So you can see this little piece of beeswax that I have is pretty light in color, and so is the one on your screen. So beeswax is an invaluable resource. First, because we take these frames with the honey all spun out and we put them out in our yard, and the bees take any little bits of honey that are left and they put it back in their colony. Then we store these frames for the next season because the bees will have a head start. They don't have to build the comb 100% from scratch. It takes 8 ounces of nectar to make 1 ounce of beeswax. So when the first job our honeybees have to do is build their wax, they're not creating as much honey. But if we're able to save this resource for them, then they get busy storing their nectar, both for their own food as well as for honey. So when I said that cut comb was more expensive, this is why. Because you're taking that resource and the bees have to start from scratch. So they have to collect the nectar, to make the wax, to build the comb, to store the honey so that we can take it. So let me pause and just see if there's any other questions here.
We do. We have one great question. So what is the reason to pasteurize honey considering it is antibacterial?
You bet. So we're going to talk in a little bit about big commercial honey farmers. And so sometimes they will do that because pasteurization helps to prevent honey from crystallizing. So, oh, I forgot, I have a jar that's crystallized. I was going to grab it. I forgot to get it. So normally when you see a jar of honey, it should look really clear like this. And you can just see how the air moves really easily around. But sometimes the molecular makeup of the honey causes little crystals. Does not change the flavor or enzymatic properties of the honey. And in fact, if you just put that jar in a bowl of warm water, it will go back to being completely liquid. If you do heat pasteurize it, it will help to prevent that. I don't personally think that what you lose in the enzymatic qualities of honey is worth that convenience. I actually love crystallized honey. It's what I put in my tea every morning. It just has this really wonderful sort of nutty flavor. It dissolves just like regular honey. So good question. Any others?
I think that's it for now. I'm sure more y'all keep putting them in the chat. We'll get to them.
All right, we'll keep going. So now that you know what honey is, how bees make it and store it, and how we get it out of the hive, I want to talk a little bit about seasonality. Most people don't think about honey as seasonal, but it is. So, in many climates, there's a spring and a fall season. Um, those are the two times during the year when plants and trees are producing nectar and bloom. So I always like to remind folks that bees also use trees for nectar and sap in addition to flowers. So when we lose trees, we're not only losing habitat, remember bees like to live in the hollowed out trunks of trees, but we also lose their forage and their food. In Texas, because we usually have very mild winters, last year notwithstanding, our queens will continue to lay and grow the colony much longer than in most places. And for that reason, we choose to harvest spring honey, which in my opinion is the very best tasting. And we leave the fall honey on the hives so that they have enough food to get through winter. As you can imagine, the things that bloom in the spring are really different than the things that bloom in the fall. So the flavor profile and the color of the two seasons honey can be very, very different. So when you buy honey in a store, it can often be from those very large commercial beekeeping operations. And they really work hard to keep the color and the flavor of their honey consistent, which means they take honey from all different geographies and mix it together. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But like with wine, I think you lose the taste of place. So just to show you the difference, I want to look at the difference in just 2 years of honey. So on the far left of your screen, you can see honey from our Red Road Bee Ranch. I always like to name our honey with its origin. These hives are literally on Red Road in Guadalupe County. So the bottom jar is from 2019 and the top is from 2020. And you can see the subtle color difference. Due to the weather and the different plants that were blooming in different concentrations, that's what causes the variation on both the color and the flavor. So in 2019, this property was covered with wildflowers. We didn't know it, but that was a bumper year for honey production. We got rain in just the right amount at just the perfect time, and the wildflowers exploded. In general, honeybees prefer flowers. In 2020, the very same land got too much rain, and again, rain washes the pollen and the nectar from the flowers. And that meant that our bees in that same spot turned to the trees for their nectar, which made the honey just a little bit darker and a little bit more nutty in flavor. So this particular bee yard is on 175 acres with lots of hickory and yaupon trees. So that's one of the things that causes those variations. This year is a lot like last year with all this rain that we're experiencing. So I'm really anxious to see how this year's harvest compares to the others. So this is a good place for us to pause and talk about bee safety. We try and incorporate this little PSA into any of the events we do, because one of the first things that we teach our kids is about bee behavior, so that they grow up being able to recognize a honeybee and know that they don't have to be afraid. So honeybees do not want to sting you. They are not aggressive by nature. They can only sting once and then they die. So the only reason a honeybee is going to sting you is if she feels threatened. And I did say yes. I did say she, because boy bees, which are called drones, don't have stingers. And you might get to see one of those in a minute. So if you're out and about and a honeybee comes to check you out, you know it's a female worker bee. So the primary reason that a honeybee will sting a human is that we swat. A swat is a threat. So if a honeybee approaches you, she's just trying to figure out if you're a flower. Now, chances are, if you're at all like me, your bathroom is stocked full of 365 body care products that are made with botanicals, lavender shampoo and mint conditioner and grapefruit body wash. Well, guess what? You smell like a flower. So honeybees are going to come, and once they know you don't have any nectar, they're going to move on. So the very best thing you can do is just stay still. One of the things that we teach our kids is a mantra that is just not a flower, not a flower. So if a honeybee is swirling around you, just stay still, remind yourself you're not a flower, and after about 3 times, she'll probably move on. Uh, Honeybees are also attracted to bright colors like yellow. So I'll show you some pollen and show you why in just a second. If you do have a honeybee that lands on you, just watch her. If you're lucky, she's going to taste you with her really long proboscis to see if you might have any nectar for her. So if you do, for some reason, get a honeybee sting, the most important thing to do is scrape your fingernail over the spot or a credit card to be sure you get the stinger out. The stinger is attached to a venom sac that will continue to deliver its venom until it's out of your skin. So that's our teeny tiny lesson on how to not fear honeybees and how to stay safe. And now we can continue with the fun stuff. So let's look at the difference in honey when it's on a frame in a hive. So on the left is spring honey, and on the right is a frame, and that really dark stuff is fall honey. You can see at the top that lighter strip, that was actually some honey from the spring, and then the season changed and they stored fall honey beneath it. So it's really important that beekeepers understand the forage of their bees. And we do that in a few ways. So I keep a photo diary of what's blooming each season. Every time we go out and visit our hives, I'm taking pictures of what's blooming. And I can compare that like tasting notes when we go to harvest. So we also watch the color of the pollen that the bees are bringing into the hive, because that tells us what flowers they've been visiting. That can be a really distinct clue. So on this frame, on the left, you can see one bee with very, very orange pollen on her legs. Those are called pollen pants. And one bee on the right that has very, very yellow pollen on her legs. So if you find yourself headed to a picnic and you want to avoid the curiosity of honeybees, I would recommend that you not wear yellow and orange, because those are the most predominant colors that flowers sport to attract our honeybees. So pollen comes in a rainbow of colors, just like our food. And it's important for bees to get pollen and nectar from several sources to maintain their health. Honeybees are monocrop pollinators. That's one of the reasons they're so productive. When they find a good source of pollen, they communicate within their hive where it is. And that's how commercial farmers use bees for hire to pollinate. So when you park a big truck full of hives in an orchard, the bees are going to work that source until it's done. So if you look on the right of your screen, this is a frame where the honeybees have stored a whole lot of pollen. It's actually a video. I don't know why I did that, but I'll play it because it'll also show you one of those really big boy bees or drone bees. You can see how much bigger he is.
That is a big drone bee. There is lots of pollen and nectar stored in those cells.
All right. I don't know about you, but that makes me motion sick. So we'll move on to the next one. I think. There we go. So I just wanted to give you a quick look at 2 different pollen and nectar sources. So on the left is goldenrod. It's a fall bloomer, and in many parts of North America, it can be a primary source of food for our honeybees. Beekeepers often say that honey that is made from goldenrod smells like dirty socks. It's not the best if you're keeping bees to produce honey to sell to people. The bees could absolutely care less because we have lots of goldenrod on our farm. That's another reason that we leave the fall honey on the hive for the bees. On the right is a mesquite bloom. So mesquites bloom in the spring and sometimes again in the fall. And honey made from mesquite nectar is rich and sweet and buttery and also a little bit nutty. So if you ever have the opportunity to taste it, definitely do. It's amazing. You may see honey at farmers markets or even at Whole Foods that is flavored. So you can see orange blossom or lavender. And those are harvested from hives that have been strategically placed on substantial crops of those fields. Honeybees can fly up to 3 miles to collect nectar, but if there's adequate forage right nearby, they'll stay close and they'll just focus on that crop. So our bee yards are about 35 miles apart from each other. And the honey from each one is very distinct in flavor. So we're really careful when we extract. We keep our honey from each location separate. In food production, that would be similar to small batch, when they keep the fruit from one orchard all together. I like to think of it more similar to estate wine, wine that's been made from grapes that are all grown on one vineyard. They're not necessarily blended with grapes from other vineyards. Honey is incredibly versatile. It can be enjoyed on its own, drizzled over cheese or fruit, on top of yogurt, over toast with peanut butter, or on oatmeal. It can be blended into a smoothie. It can be mixed into a salad dressing or a marinade. And honey has so much more to offer our bodies than refined sugar that I've worked to replace sugar with honey in almost all of my recipes. So honey has incredible nutritional value where sugar does not. Honey does have a few more calories, but I think the nutritional benefits for me are worth it. So I always like to start with baking because I'm an obsessed baker. One of my favorite recipes is honey cardamom cookies. And the thing to remember is that honey is a liquid and sugar is a dry ingredient. So in order to replace sugar with honey, you just have to adjust for both. Honey is also a lot sweeter than sugar, so you can often use less. My best recommendation is use your friends Google and Alexa anytime you want to make substitutions. They can almost always give you the right proportions. Oh, and now my Alexa's talking to me, sorry. So I have a huge fig tree and I love fig jam more than anything. So I now make my fig jam with only figs and honey and a little bit of lemon juice, no refined sugar. So if you love jam but are trying to make those switches in your diet, this for me has been an incredible one. So why would you consider replacing refined sugar? Honey has a lower glycemic index than sugar does, so it doesn't cause those sharp spikes in blood sugar. If you are an afternoon tea or coffee drinker, if you use honey as a sweetener, you're not going to get a crash, which is lovely. I mentioned that honey has just a few more calories, but it's sweeter, so you can often use less honey than you would sugar. Honey also contains niacin and riboflavin and pantheolinic acid and calcium and magnesium and manganese and potassium and phosphorus and zinc, amino acids, antioxidants, phytochemicals. So it's loaded with all of this goodness for our bodies. And all of that is what gives honey its anti-inflammatory benefits. So honey is often used to help treat inflammation in the body. The other common question I get is about local honey and the benefits for allergies. So I always like to speak to that for just a second. Honey does contain tiny particles of pollen, which is the other reason to purchase raw or unfiltered honey. So if you truly filter honey, it will remove the pollen particles. But the idea is that if you know what you're allergic to and you're eating honey from an area that has that crop, your body will be desensitized because you'll be getting little tiny doses of that pollen and you can become less sensitive. I will say you have to be hyper aware. So here in Austin, many people are allergic to cedar pollen. Well, bees don't like cedar. It's not a very good source of nectar. So eating local honey is not going to help you so much with your cedar allergies. There are so many other reasons to eat local honey. Just do it because it's delicious. But if you are sensitive to ragweed or some of the other grasses and things that our bees do use, honey can definitely help desensitize to that. You can also buy bee pollen, which is high in protein, and mix it into smoothies or sprinkle it onto salads. I get questions about how do you collect it. We can talk about that if you want to. The other thing I like to share with people is that honey is sold by weight, not volume. So if you find a jar of honey at a farmer's market that is this is a 16-ounce jar, but it actually contains 21 ounces of honey because honey is heavier than water. Good local honey is probably going to cost $1 or more per ounce. I can tell you local honey is a passion project. It is not necessarily profitable. It is amazing though. So when you invest in a a jar of local honey, you're supporting not only the beekeeper, but the environment and all of the things that our pollinators do for us. So what can you do to support pollinators? You can buy organic food and use natural products at home and in your garden. So avoid pesticides at all costs. You can share some of what you learned today with your friends and family. You can buy local honey, and you can grow pollinator-friendly plants and let the dandelions in your yard bloom. I know it's hard. They look like weeds. We've been taught that they're weeds, but they're often the first nectar source for honeybees. So if you can just let that pretty little yellow flower happen and then pluck them out of your yard, you'll be helping your local population of bees. If you want to learn more, you can always meet a local beekeeper. There are lots of beekeepers in almost every community. There's almost always a beekeepers association. The farmers market is a great place to go. You've got my telephone number. I will talk about bees for days. You can visit a local apiary. If you're here in Austin, we've actually funded the apiary at the Sustainable Food Center. You can just walk up and watch the bees fly. They've built flyover walls around their apiary with mesh and plexiglass, so you can look in and see the bees at work, but the bees are flying up overhead. You don't need any protection. They also, just by chance, built their apiary in a mating zone. So sometimes you'll see those big drone bees fall out of the sky after they've mated. That's a whole nother discussion. Whole Kids Foundation has loads and loads and loads of info for families on our website. So we have a World of Honeybees link at the top of our website. I think I mentioned we are hosting another event on Monday of next week that is all about the inside of a beehive and bee life and life cycles and all of that fun stuff about the queen bee, if you're interested in that sort of thing. And I'm hopeful that all of this rambling has helped you appreciate the enormous effort that goes into making honey available for people. So in her lifetime, a honeybee will make 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey. So if you're like me, I really like honey in my chai tea in the morning. And every morning when I put that honey in, I say thank you to the 12 honeybees that it took to make that honey possible for me. So, along with the appreciation for our team members this week, we're here to give gratitude to all of the honeybees in our world. If this was fun for you, we are so June is National Pollinator Month, and Whole Kids is celebrating with our Give Bees a Chance campaign. We do have an experience box that you can order online. Nikki's going to put that link in the chat. It's aimed for families. We say 5 to 11, but I think it's super fun. We have lots of aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas that give them as gifts. And part of that purchase helps support the grants and education that we do. If you want some super fun attire, our Save the Queen t-shirts are available as well. That's the end of my commercial message. Nikki, what other questions do we have? I see the chat is filled up.
Yes, loving all these questions coming in, and now I think we all want to make some fig jam. I know I do. We had a couple more questions come in. How did you protect your bees from last winter's storm?
That's a very good question. So what you do for your colonies every single day is what helps them through erratic weather. I always like to remind people that so bees are not native to North America. They're all derived from European species. But one fun fact is Whole Kids has actually funded beehives at schools as far north as Yellowknife, Canada. So it's a territory, and it's as close to the North Pole as you can get. So bees can live in all climates. As beekeepers, what we do is we want to make sure that that colony is healthy going into the winter. So that was what we did. We made sure that the queen was healthy, was laying, that we had the right number of bees to keep that hive warm. So in the winter, the bees aren't out flying, collecting nectar. They're clustered in their hive, keeping their queen warm. That's their function. So at that point in the year, the bees can live for about 6 months. So we made sure our hives were strong and healthy going into the winter. We made sure they had plenty of food, plenty of pollen, that their entrances were reduced so that the area that they had to defend was much smaller than it is right now when all of the bees are coming and going. With our 30 hives, we lost one, and it was our weakest hive with the fewest number of bees to keep that queen warm. However, because our other hives were healthy, they outgrew their space and we were able to split. So now we're back up to 30 hives. Very, very good question. So keeping your hives healthy all year long is the very best thing you can do to help them, either through 57 days over 100 or a week below freezing.
That's awesome. One more question. What is creamed honey? You mentioned that earlier, and how is it made?
Yeah, so creamed honey is just air introduced into honey. So it's also called whipped honey. So you can take just regular old honey and put it in a mixer, or use one of those hand mixers. And when you introduce air, it turns into creamed honey. I will tell you, it is delectable, and it spreads incredibly easy on a beautiful sourdough piece of toast. I just don't think you can go wrong with honey in any form. So yeah, so you may see creamed honey out there as well, and you'll notice that it's whiter in color because it has that air mixed in.
That's awesome.
Anything we missed?
Of course, my computer just froze, but yes, we have another question. So do you foresee vegan honey becoming popular?
Well, remember I told you if you ask 10 beekeepers a question, you get 12 answers. I will give you my perspective. So from my perspective, vegan honey there's no such thing. It's kind of like vegan meat. It's not meat. There are different views on honey. We had some vegans on our last event that we did, and one of them shared the thought that whether we intervene or not as humans, honeybees are going to make honey, and for that reason and the health benefit, she chooses to consume honey. She buys local honey, and that meets her personal values. I can say that probably our most famous vegan, John Mackey, does eat honey from his honeybees. He has honeybees on his ranch. But it's really a personal choice. I always encourage people, like everything at Whole Foods Market, we have 5 steps that are represented in our meat counter. I always encourage people, ask your honey provider, your beekeeper, why do they keep bees? If you are talking to a beekeeper that does everything humanly possible to maximize honey production, you might ask a few more questions. When people ask me why I keep bees, I keep bees for the health of the bees, because our world needs more honeybees. So the choices that we make as beekeepers are to keep our hives as healthy as possible. And sometimes that means that we don't get any honey, and that's okay with us. When we do take honey, we're taking honey that is clogging up the hive because there haven't been any predators. So our decision to take honey off of a hive is actually for the health of the colony. The same thing with pollen. Bees are not at all harmed by the collecting of honey or pollen, but some people choose not to consume bee pollen because it's an animal product. So I think we should call vegan honey, whatever it is, whatever the origins are. It's not honey because the bees didn't make it. And I think that there are certainly ways to enjoy honey, should you choose to, with lots of care for the amazing insects that produce it. Sorry, that got really philosophical, but I hope it helped.
That was great, Nana. One more question. Do you have any tips if somebody's going to be starting their first hive?
Oh, goodness. Yes, we have lots of tips, and I'm always happy to have those conversations. So I will say that beekeeping is not inexpensive. There are ways to be frugal about it. But one of my best tips is consider starting with 2 colonies. The ability to compare is invaluable when you're learning. So if you're looking in one hive and you're not sure if that queen is producing at the rate that she should be for where we are in the season, and you have a second hive that you can compare it to, it makes everything easier. If you don't want to have two hives, have a bee mentor with whom you can experience some comparisons and some different hive situations. Having a bee mentor is absolutely critical. So we require any school that we fund to host a beehive that they have a bee mentor to help them troubleshoot and just handle all the things that come up. I would also always recommend to anybody that's considering keeping bees, go do a hive inspection, whether that's taking a class or just going with a beekeeper to take a look in their hives. It helps you know what to expect. One of the things that I'll never forget is how incredibly loud bees are. So when you open the hive and all of the guard bees come up, even though there's only a few dozen of them, it has this deafening effect. So I always like people to feel prepared. Even when I take somebody that's never inspected a hive, I say, this is going to be a little startling. All of a sudden there are going to be these insects that you've been taught your entire life to be afraid of, and they're going to be making noise in your head. And you just take a deep breath and appreciate nature. So we could talk all day long. Also, one of our Austin bee heroes, Tara Chapman, who has 2 Hives Honey, during COVID, she developed an online intro to beekeeping course that you can get on her website. I think it's $75. It is money well spent. And yes, I did see in the chat that, some folks consider the humanity of keeping bees and the fact that bees can be harmed. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I can tell you that we move incredibly slowly when we're working our hives, but it is inevitable that we crush a bee here or there. That said, there are about 2 million bees in the world because we keep bees that wouldn't be there if we didn't. So I get it. I completely understand. Sorry, Nikki, I might have usurped a question.
You're totally fine. You're covering a lot of them before we can get to them. So looks like we have one more. So you talked about scents earlier that attract bees. Is insect repellent effective for bees, or can there be scents that will keep bees away from you, or you just say, I'm not a flower?
That's a very good question. So I can tell you that, so this is way beyond honey. My husband and I do bee rescue. So when a hive outgrows its space, the way that the honeybees deal with that is they make a new queen and half of the hive leaves to go and find a new spot. Well, because we're taking down trees constantly, sometimes that means that bees will swarm into somebody's backyard tree or their mailbox or their water meter. And thankfully, we live in a community where people often will call a beekeeper. So we'll go and get those bees and give them a proper new home. We also put up boxes that will attract swarms, and we use lemongrass oil to attract the bees. Bees are very, very attracted to lemongrass. So if you want to avoid bees, do not use anything with lemongrass in it. There are definitely some scents that repel bees. They are nothing you would want to smell like. There is a concoction that we use called Bee Be Gone. It's a blend of natural stuff. So once we've removed a swarm, we'll just wipe it onto the tree branch to keep the bees from going back there. You don't want to smell like that. So the very best thing you can do, and please forgive me, don't shower. Don't use all of those flowery smelling products. That's probably the best repellent. Also, some people say don't eat bananas. If you're going someplace where there are going to be a lot of honeybees, I'm told the scent of bananas is similar to the alert pheromone that bees give off when they sting or when the guard bees activate. I've tested it. I've gone out without eating bananas. I've eaten a banana and then gone into the hives. I can't speak to that, but that's something that's pretty common in bee knowledge out there. Well, you guys, I know we're right at 2 o'clock.
Yep.
If you have to go, please know how much we appreciate you joining. We are here for you 364 days a year. You've got our digits. Never hesitate to call us if we can support you. We do a lot of team activities. So if you want to do something like this with your team, let us know. And if you still have questions, I'll stay on until they're all answered. Sorry, Nikki, go ahead.
You beat me to it. I think we have all the questions and we are right 1 minute to spare.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe that. I'll stay on and answer questions. You guys, this was the first time we did this content all about honey. So if you have thoughts or if there are things that could have been different or better, we would love any constructive criticism and feedback, because we'd love to keep doing these for you guys. Have a fantastic team member appreciation week, and please tell your teams that we appreciate them as well. All right, let's see. Nikki, you said you got all the questions out of chat?
Yep, we got all the questions.
Oh, you know what? I forgot to take a screenshot.
No,
I think you were the only one on video.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you had mentioned a team member that does like a class for newbies. Who is that? How do I get a hold of that?
You bet. So the person I mentioned is not a team member, although she should be.
Oh, okay.
Her name is Tara Chapman, and she has a business in town called Two Hives Honey. And the class that she developed during COVID is available online. And Nikki put the link for that in the chat.
Oh, okay.
But I'm also happy to just introduce you to her. I will tell you, she is very pregnant. So that's why I recommend the online class. I think she'll be growing us a whole kid any day now. But also, if you're curious about beekeeping, we may test another event about beekeeping, or I'm always happy to talk. Just give me a call anytime.
I did write down your phone number, so you might be getting a call from me.
Use it. I answer it. It freaks people out.
All right. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this.
Yes, absolutely. Somebody wants the recipe. You know what, Nikki? I shared that with somebody this morning. I have it on my blog. I think we have it on one of our blogs, don't we?
We'll send, let me check. I put your honey blog post in there. It might be in that. Otherwise, I'm going to send an email out to everyone after this, probably in the next couple days. So we'll hunt down any of the recipes and include those in that email as well.
Okay, I will find them and send them to you. And then if we don't already have them somewhere, we can do that. Awesome. I think we still have tons of folks on. You guys feel free to ask questions. And if not, please enjoy the rest of your day.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Is there a book that you would suggest for people that literally have zero experience, but know that like my region needs more honeybees? So I really want to do this in my yard because I have a lot of land. Is there a book or anything that I should be reading and looking into? Oh,
so this is one that we use. It's called The Bees in Your Backyard. So the reason I like this one is because it's about all the pollinators. So all we talked about today were honeybees because they're the only ones that make honey, but there are thousands and thousands of species of pollinators. Honeybees are important for the food that we eat and sell, but all the pollinators are important. So this one, The Bees in Your Backyard, is really good. And if you want to do an event like this for folks in your region, we are happy to do that. Team member engagement is one of our top priorities. So we are happy to help in any way. There are a couple of other books that I'm thinking of. There's one that the Xerces Society did that's 100 pollinating plants. And there's another that's written by a guy named Paul Stamets. If you will send me an email, I can send you a book list.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Awesome. Any tips on starting your first hive? Yes, I have lots of tips on starting your first hive. It just depends on why you're keeping bees and how much you have to invest. So beekeeping can be not cheap. So I think one of the best ways to start beekeeping is with what's called a nuke or a nucleus hive. So you saw our hives have 10 frames. A nuke is essentially 5 frames. It's a mini hive, and you can order those from local beekeepers. You can even order them through the mail. And it's literally just a mini hive. It has a queen, it has all the worker bees, it has resources like honey and brood, and it just starts to grow. So I think for a new beekeeper, it's the most satisfying because you get to almost immediately experience the whole life cycle of bees. Um, Nukes right now, I think, are about $185 per. And then you need your woodware, so the actual boxes that you'll keep your bees in. You need your tools and your protection. So, a veil, or we use full suits just because we have so many hives. The other way to go is what's called a package of bees. Literally, you can order them in the mail. They come through the US Post Office. You'll get to meet your mail person. They think it's very interesting. But it is literally just a mesh box with about 3 pounds of bees and a queen. And then if you have all of the equipment, you can install that package into your hive. I personally don't like that method as well because it's not as humane for the bees. When we first started, we ordered some packages through the mail, and that's not a natural thing for bees. They don't travel well on hot trucks, and people don't understand how to handle them. So it is more affordable. Generally, you can get a package of bees for about $95 or $100. I think the extra expense of a nuke is worth it. If you are super frugal, like my husband and I, you can do bee rescue. You can go out with someone who rescues bees and learn how to do that. It's not terribly hard. It does require a little bit of practice. And then you have what we call freebies. I will say that you can't always count on their disposition. Because we rescue lots of bees, and they're usually, they're not native, because bees are not native to North America, but they're usually hybridized for our climate. They tend to be spicier or a little bit more defensive than some of the species that are bred for docility. So the European varieties are very docile. So if you do bee rescue, know that you definitely need to have equipment and have a little bit of experience, or somebody that has done it before.
I have a question, Nona. This isn't in the chat, just something I thought of. You mentioned earlier about, some larger honey producers might mix a bunch of different honeys. Do people put fillers or like syrups or other things in honey? And if so, is there anything we can keep an eye out on the packaging to know? Or are there any rules about that?
It's horrible. It's a whole lot like maple syrup. Yes, there is artificial honey in the world. It's a terrible thing. It just makes me so angry. But people do cut honey with other sugary sweet things. A lot of it usually comes in from overseas. So, the very easiest thing to do is always buy local honey. If you can know your beekeeper, that's the best. Next to that is buy honey at Whole Foods Market. Whole Foods quality standards solve for all the things that would make it difficult. But yes, I will say, if you are at a big box retailer, really look at the label on your honey for its origins. I know that for one of the events we did, because we haven't harvested honey this year, I ran out. So I used Bon Maman, which is an amazing company, but I had to do a lot of research to understand were they blending, where did it come from, because it was coming from overseas. So yes, you can wind up with not 100% real honey. So it's always good to read the label, but shop at Whole Foods and it's not a concern.
Excellent. Not sure if you just saw a question coming from Christopher. Is Manuka honey just marketing, or do you feel it has additional benefits?
You know what? So I'm biased. Manuka honey generally comes from Hawaii, which is where I was born. I did get to spend a little bit of time with some bees when I was there last. I think that the taste and health benefits of the place where the honey comes from are very real. So I do think that, Manuka honey is different than the honey that we produce in Seguin, Texas. And because of the pureness of the plants that generally the bees are drawing their nectar and pollen from, it does have different properties. I haven't studied it in great depth and detail, but I think what I feel comfortable saying is just like great wine, that sense and that taste and the benefit of place is very real, both in in my practice and in my heart.
I just put we have a roundup of 10 bee movies and videos blog posts that we put out last year. So make sure to check that out. The pollinators, that first suggestion reminded me of the fillers and additives to honey, because I think they cover that in there a little bit.
Yep.
Question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's these little, they call them bee houses.
Yeah.
Are those suggestible to just help out the bees, like having one? I mean, I'm not really interested in
Beekeeping, sure. Well,
right.
that too is beekeeping. It's just a different approach. Yes, so there are lots of different kinds of bee houses. You can even make them. So today we only talked about honeybees, which is a very specific species. There are 20,000 species of bees in the world and about 4,000 or 5,000 here in North America. Some of them are what are called solitary bees, and they're the ones that love those little bee houses that you can see that have like straws or tubes. You can even take newspaper or magazine pages and roll them into tubes and rubber band them together. And you're going to attract a very different, interesting kind of pollinator. There is a kind of pollinator that we have in our backyard called a mason bee, and they love to live in firewood or logs. So if you take a drill and just drill holes in a like a log, you'll be creating a home for a very specific kind of native bee that are very, very important. Our native pollinators are really important to our ecosystem. So yes, there are lots of ways that you can support pollinators and create wonderful homes for bees. Also water. Our bees need to stay hydrated. So if you have plants that have saucers, leave that dirty water in there. I know the mosquitoes like it too, but bees really love dirty water. Or you can put out a saucer that has some rocks or pebbles in it. So bees need something to land on so that they can go down and drink. They don't like their wings to get wet. So yes, there's lots of things you can do. And if you want to support butterflies, which are also important pollinators, plant milkweed. It is both beautiful and it's, our butterflies just love it. Also, my experience is dill. I always plant dill and I never get to enjoy any of it because the monarch caterpillars love it. They've been scarce the past year or so, so maybe we all need to plant dill. Good question. All right, you guys, we could talk bees for days. If you're still on, I know you will love the event that we're going to do on Monday. And if you can't make it Monday, we do it pretty often. And again, if you want to get your teams involved, we do team-specific events. And most importantly, just know that what you do every single day makes what we do possible, and we're deeply, deeply grateful. So we will leave you. Have a wonderful rest of your Team Member Appreciation Week. And thanks for supporting the bees and enjoying some honey.